So, witness, please state your name and occupation for the court.
Eugene Megatoba, lecturer in forensic medicine at the Imperial Yume University in Tokyo, Japan.
And, Professor Megatoba, the young lady beside you is?
This is Dr. Maria Gore, Scotland Yard's practicing coroner, the daughter of Dr. Scythe, I understand.
Yes, Dr. Scythe.
I'm afraid I can't tell you why she's here. He just appeared.
You summoned this strange Japanese man as a witness to that autopsy. But you don't summon Mama? That makes no sense. She was there too.
That's about the size of it. I've had her eyes boring into the side of my cheek constantly, whilst I was in the antechamber too.
Poor man. The idea of it's making me shudder.
The revelation about Dr. Scythe that came to light some days ago defiled the reputation of the entire judiciary. She was therefore deemed unfit to appear as a witness in today's proceedings. The Ministry of Justice's decision on that is final. Well, we wouldn't want any more perjury to be committed, would we?
The Ministry of Justice? Some questionable strings that are being pulled, I think.
I remember you, Dr. Mikitoba, but I certainly never expected to be meeting you under these circumstances. Hey, yes, it's been a long while around the Sugar Hut.
The prosecution understands that you are a visiting student of forensic science in London until 10 years ago.
That's right, I studied under Dr. Wilson at St. Jacinthus. So you were present at the autopsy of my brother, Lord Clint Van Zeeks. I was, yes. I assisted Dr. Wilson with the entire procedure.
Mama is far more skilled than any Japanese man.
Well, Dr. Wilson asked me to be his primary assistant on that occasion.
And this autopsy report was actually penned by you, I believe.
Yes, I noted all of the doctor's findings, and when we were done, he read through the document and signed it.
Poor Mama. Her secondary assistant, she wouldn't have such a good view of all the innards.
So, Professor, do you remember Inspector Gregson?
Yes, of course. If it wasn't for his insistence, Lord Van Zeek's autopsy would never have happened. But he was absolutely convinced that it would reveal decisive evidence against Ginsin, you see. So Lord Strongheart had to entreat the nobility to allow it to take place. Do correct me if I'm wrong, my lord. It was as a result of that autopsy that the mass murderer was apprehended and justice was done.
But Gregson admitted it before he was killed. He admitted that the results of the autopsy were fabricated. You were there at the time, so you must testify. You have an obligation to tell the truth about what really went on.
Absolutely. That's precisely why I'm here.
And that's why
I'm here too.
Very well then, you will give your formal testimony now, witness. But before you begin, a word of warning. Oh? You will state truthfully and accurately what you saw and what you heard at the time. I wouldn't dream of doing otherwise, my lord. The moment your testimony verges on supposition, I will expel you from my courtroom. Remember that. Hey! From my own observations, I couldn't say there was any indication of the autopsy results having been fabricated. Death resulted from a wound made by a Western-style sword transfixing the heart, That I found a little strange.
There were no other signs of internal injury, nothing questionable at all. It was just that beautiful but dangerous piece of evidence removed from the man's stomach.
Presumed to have been swallowed by the victim as a way of posthumously identifying his assailant.
No indication. Nothing to suggest fabrication. Professor Manitoba, are you certain about that?
Well, nothing that I could positively identify as such. Much swear to in testimony.
Well, that clears things up nicely.
The only fabrication here, Sergey, has come from you.
What? You claim the inspector confessed this before his death, but that is the fabrication. No, he freely acknowledged it. I swear he did.
Freely? With the tip of a sword at his throat?
The man was clearly at his wit's end.
The court will give no credence to this confession that was uttered in obvious desperation.
Quite simply, there was nothing questionable about the investigation of Lord Clint Van Zeek's death. And with this testimony we have, without question, uncovered the whole truth of the matter.
If I may, my lord. There was most certainly something questionable about it, and the whole truth does rather elude us, I fear.
I beg your pardon?
Well, you're obviously aware of the facts of the case. All four of the professor's previous victims died when an enormous beast was set upon them that ripped out their throats.
Oh, such horrifying crimes.
But curiously, the killer's last victim, Lord Clint Van Zeeks, suffered a different fate.
Yes, you're right. He was stabbed through the heart with a sword.
That's enough.
I believe I warned you about this, witness. I promised to curtail your testimony as soon as it entered the realms of supposition or speculation. Very well, my lord. In that case, the defense will pursue a conclusion to this during the cross-examination.
What?
I have the right to cross-examine every witness after their testimony, and I fully intend to exercise that right. Rinosuke, I'm afraid that even the presiding judge has no authority to contravene the letter of the law, as I'm sure every member of the judiciary present in the gallery would agree.
Very well, you may begin, counsel. However, the moment your argument strays from the established facts, I will not hesitate to bring the cross-examination to an end. Proceed with caution.
Yes, my lord. Wait, so does that mean I can't press on everything? Is that what it means? Either way, I'm gonna do a manual save. I know it just auto-saved for me, but I'm gonna do a manual save as well. Alright.
From my own observations, I couldn't say there was any indication of the autopsy report result having been fabricated.
You couldn't say.
No, certainly not.
But then you couldn't say there wasn't any indication either, could you?
No, true, I couldn't. I was at Dr. Wilson's side as he performed the procedure, recording what he did. But at times, of course, he instructed me to fetch implements and such like. Whilst I was away from the operating table, obviously I could have missed something.
And at those times, what was the secondary assistant doing? Following this Japanese man's orders to adjust the lighting of passive implements. But that doesn't mean Mama wasn't a vital part of the team.
Quite, yes. So would you kindly refrain from staring at my cheek like that?
Professor Megatoba, think. Was there nothing at all that seemed out of place to you?
Well, yes, there was, as a matter of fact. Death resulted from a wound made by a Western style sword transfixing the heart. That I found a little strange.
In all of the previous 4 killings attributed to the Professor, the victims were killed by an enormous dog, I believe. Their throats were, well, mauled.
Correct. And yet Lord Van Zeeks was stabbed.
Ah, do you mean to say you think Lord Clint Van Zeeks may not in fact have been one of the Professor's victims?
There is no basis on which to doubt the findings of the investigation carried out at the time.
But
Genshin Asogi confessed to all of his crimes upon his arrest. He admitted to having taken the lives of all 5 members of the aristocracy. Ugh. Yet the beast that was used to carry out the killings was never identified. No evidence was found to suggest that Genshin had ever kept a dog. A true hound of hell.
there were no other signs of eternal injury. Nothing questionable at all. But, you weren't actually present at the autopsy yourself, were you, Dr. Gory? Does that matter?
Well, I just wonder how useful your testimony can be in that case, really. I mean, it would be different if your mother, Dr. Scythe, were in the stand.
I've read all the paperwork about the case, and Mama's told me the story countless times. The statement I just made is exactly what's written in the autopsy report.
I did confirm that myself at the time, it's true. Besides the stab wound, there were no other signs of internal trauma.
I see.
Mama told me all about it.
Oh?
She says there was nothing of note internally. But they did find an amazing piece of evidence. Something unbelievable.
Unbelievable? What do you mean? Come on, Dr. Gory, what was it?
I forgot. It was just that beautiful but dangerous piece of evidence removed from the man's stomach.
What exactly was it, though? What does beautiful but dangerous mean?
Well, it was sparkly and round, with a hole, as if it might slip over a finger, perhaps.
It was a ring, belonging to Genshin Asogi.
My father's ring was inside the victim's stomach.
At the time, Genshin wore a large ring on the digits quarters of his left hand, the 4th or ring finger. I'd understood it was some sort of keepsake.
When my father left Japan for London 16 years ago, I was 8 years old, but I remember that ring. You do? My father's possessions were sent to our family home in Japan after his death, but the ring wasn't among them.
Obviously not. It was a key piece of evidence. It remains under lock and key in the stores at Scotland Yard to this day. After the autopsy, Genshin was summoned by the police to check for the presence of his ring. It wasn't on his hand, of course. Moreover, there were deep abrasions on his finger where it had been pulled off. There wasn't a man there or then, right before my eyes.
How could they?
I brought the ring along with me today.
What?
Here it is, a bit dusty from years in the stars.
Good gracious, yes, that's it. I haven't seen that in 10 long years.
And that was found inside the victim's stomach?
Yes, I'm afraid so.
You hesitated there, Professor Megatoba. Should we read something into that?
Well, it's just that thinking back now. I didn't actually witness the moment it was extracted from the victim's body.
Oh my, really?
At that precise moment, Dr. Wilson had asked me to fetch him a new scalpel, you see. Dr. Gurley, removal of historic evidence from the stores requires my consent, does it not?
However it came to be here, the court cannot deny that this is crucial evidence for today's proceedings.
Very well, you may submit it.
The claws clasping the gem look sharp enough to cause a very nasty scratch. It's not the sort of ring normally seen in Japan. They almost look like claws protecting that jewel. We must examine it very carefully, Miss Naruhodo. Very carefully indeed.
Presumed to have been swallowed by the victim as a way of posthumously identifying his assailant.
And that was a decisive piece of evidence that led to Genshin Asogi's arrest?
Correct. After further investigations by Scotland Yard, the man admitted to his crimes.
That's a lie. My father was no killer. Barak Van Zieks, it was you. You twisted the truth to suit your purposes.
Your hatred of me doesn't change the facts that were established 10 years ago. My brother Clint had closed in on the professor. In the end, he exposed the man and put a stop to his lethal rampage. In the way only a man of my brother's caliber could.
That's everything, is it? Poor father, he looks so troubled. Perhaps because 10 years ago, something happened that's been weighing on his mind. Oh, I couldn't say were his words. That phrasing was very deliberate, I'm sure. I wonder if he's had his suspicions all these years. If that's the case, we need to use this cross-examination to prove what really happened, and remove any trace of doubt. If we could establish that Kazuma-sama's claim of fabricated evidence was true, we can't shy away from this now, even if what we might uncover could lead to total calamity. Do not worry, Miss Naruhodo. I will be right beside you, whatever may happen. Alright, let's examine that ring. Is there blood? No. These fat claws are doing a good job of protecting the equally fat gemstone in the middle of this ring. Yes, if you are clumsy, you could give yourself a rather nasty cut on them, I should think. Ow! Now my finger is bleeding. The claws really are sharp. Oh my, that was very quick clumsiness, Miss Naruhodo, even for you. Oh, who would make such a dangerous ring? You couldn't swallow it without doing yourself some fairly serious damage. Surely. A sticky mochi bun of about that size would go down much better, with some red bean paste in the middle. Someone as clumsy as me would probably manage to choke on it somehow. Alright, now that we've established that, okay. There we go. No signs of internal injury. I found that hard to believe. The court has heard and seen the ring that was extracted from the victim's stomach. But you didn't actually see it being removed, did you, Professor Mikitoba?
That's right, as I said in my testimony before. At that moment, I was fetching a replacement scalpel that Dr. Wilson had requested.
In other words, you can neither confirm nor deny whether this ring, in fact, really came from the victim's stomach or not.
What are you suggesting, counsel?
that the ring was never in the victim's stomach to begin with. It's entirely feasible that Dr. Wilson fabricated that detail about the autopsy. What are you saying? That Dr. Wilson... That Dr. Wilson was in possession of the ring in advance, after it was somehow stolen from Mr. Asogi. And he produced it during the procedure, pretending to have found it there and then in the victim's stomach.
Objection! Supposition at best. What possible evidence do you have to support such a rash claim?
This evidence, right here. That's the autopsy report.
It's explicit in that report, Counsel.
Other than the ring, nothing unusual was noted internally, so I'm not sure how you intend to prove your point. You've already done it for me, my lord. The lack of internal injury says it all.
What?
To swallow a ring of this size would require considerable effort and determination, and in addition to its size, there are the sharp claws around the gemstone to contend with.
My brother was a determined man, and on the brink of death, even more so, I am sure. He would have stopped at nothing to ensure that evil killer was brought to justice.
But if he really had swallowed that enormous ring, it's inconceivable that no traces of its passage down his throat would have remained as internal trauma.
No! And there you have arrived at the sticking point. That's precisely why I had my doubts about the findings of myself 10 years ago.
Then why didn't you say something at the time?
I did. I still remember the conversation I had with Dr. Wilson in the laboratory that day.
Look at this. Now this is a very curious thing to find in a man's stomach, wouldn't you say?
But isn't that rather peculiar, Dr. Wilson?
What's that now, Megatoba?
Well, if he swallowed a ring of that size with those sharp metal claws that it has, surely you'd expect to see damage to the throat and esophagus, torn mucous membranes at the very least.
Dr. Megatoba, may I remind you that I have vastly more experience than you?
I'm terribly sorry.
I can think of plenty ways to explain why no injuries would be seen. No, let's say this. The victim would appear to have ingested the item as evidence to identify his assailant. Go ahead. Write it down.
So I was right. Dr. Wilson deliberately fabricated the result of the autopsy to implicate my father.
I'm disappointed, Counsel. That argument is nothing more than speculation.
What?
Dr. Wilson was Britain's leading authority on forensic science and autopsy work. There is no scientific basis on which to doubt the man's expert opinion. Pardon the interruption, my lord, but damage to the mucous membranes of the throat is easily identified even in living subjects.
Using a device called an endoscope, recently demonstrated in practical use in France. I want one! The government can pay.
I don't think so.
And Dr. Gary, rest assured that your removal of evidence from the stores without permission will not go unpunished.
We open up the dead to find the truth.
I beg your pardon?
But Mama, she chose to stitch her corpses up with all her secrets inside. That's wrong.
Dr. Gori, it's looking as though she's chosen to walk a different path to her mama.
Yes, the ring.
What about the ring?
I've just remembered something. An earlier incident.
What incident?
The one I recounted to you before, about a memory I have. Of Genshin Asogi saving my life.
What? My father saved your life?
It was 10 years ago, on a foggy night. Genshin and I were walking down some back street at a late hour. All of a sudden...
Don't make a peep! You're coming with us!
All of our assailants were armed with pistols, their faces obscured by scarves. The next thing I knew, there was silence all around. Genshin lay on the cobbled street. Blood was seeping from his left hand. He shielded me. It was on the ring finger of his left hand that he used to wear that ring.
Are you saying...
I've always believed those thugs were after me, but now I'm starting to question if perhaps I wasn't the intended target after all.
Wait, but...
Genshin was arrested 2 days after that attack, and in that short interval, the size of evidence needed to indict him was miraculously found.
You mean the ring was stolen from him? You think that's what those thugs were after that night?
Objection!
You pathetic coward. You expect me to believe that you weren't involved?
What do you mean by that?
It was you, wasn't it? You're the one who took it. You stole my father's ring. You set the whole thing up so you could paint him as a mass murderer and... Kazuma, open your eyes. Rinosuke, you must know deep down, the truth can be completely obscured even when your judgment is only slightly clouded. But at the moment, you seem to be floundering through a dense fog. Is that why you were so insistent I should be present in this trial? To see you like this?
Well, this is an amusing spectacle. What a grandiose expression on your face, as if you were Lady Justice herself. But it seems you've thoroughly convinced yourself of this alleged fabrication of the autopsy results. So much so that you're apparently blind to the blatant contradiction that would be born of it. What? Though it's extremely hard to believe, let us imagine that there was some misconduct during the autopsy. If that were the case, why would Asogi not have disputed the finding in his trial?
Oh.
In the closed court hearing 10 years ago, the defendant never once denied the claims against him. Isn't that right, Lord Van Zieks? Yes, that is indeed correct. Upon hearing the verdict of guilty, he merely closed his eyes, quietly accepting the judgment. The actions of a man who has accepted responsibility for his deeds and is resigned to his fate.
But then... Oh my, that is very strange. If Mr. Asogi did nothing to oppose the charges against him, then... that would surely mean there was no fabricated evidence.
An obvious conclusion at which you have arrived many minutes ago, Prosecutor Asogi. Your twisted loyalty and clouded judgment are hampering your ability for logical thought. Genshin Asogi's silence at his hearing can mean only one thing. There was no fabrication of evidence during the autopsy of his final victim 10 years ago. Ah!
But if that autopsy was all above board, there'll be nothing to stop Lawrence Strongheart bringing this trial to an immediate conclusion.
Objection.
Thank you, Renosuke. If it wasn't for your frank words just now, this trial may very well have ended prematurely. Kazuma?
What's this latest absurdity, Counsel?
My lord, your reasoning is perfectly sound. But for one giant hole.
I beg your pardon?
You claim my father's silence was due to the fact that there was no fabricated evidence. But there's another possible explanation. You have overlooked the possibility that he had a reason for maintaining that silence.
Objection.
Silence that would lead him to being convicted and sent to his death? If the autopsy results for an invention, there's no conceivable reason why the man wouldn't have protested.
Objection.
Oh, those results were an invention, alright. There's no question of that. Or are you forgetting that 2 people with a connection to that autopsy have been assassinated? If I force the grievances I feel from my mind, I start to see you in a very different light. I think perhaps it's you who's been living in delusion these 10 years.
Me?
Kazuma-sama has created one last chance for us here, Mr. Naruhodo. If we can only show there was a reason for his father's silence in his trial. A reason why the man would have said nothing even though he was innocent. Could it have been part of some negotiation, perhaps?
Enough rhetoric. The court must be shown evidence. What proof do you have that could possibly explain Asoga's silence in court?
Take that.
Sure, why not? This is the defense's answer to that question.
As I indicated before, my patience for rhetoric is growing thin.
You could have at least accompanied that penalty with an explanation of why that answer was wrong. If Kazuma-sama's father knew that the evidence being used to convict him was fabricated, why would he have said nothing in his trial? I don't know. If it were me, I'd have protested my innocence and that was full blue in the face. So if you're right about the autopsy results, there must have been a strong reason for his silence. Well then, perhaps he was saying nothing in exchange for some sort of clemency. That could be it. My lord, the defense would like to...
Enough rhetoric. The court must be shown evidence. What proof do you have that could possibly explain Asoga's silence in court?
Really? Because he knew he was gonna escape? He made a deal with Vigil? I guess, okay.
Take that.
I admit I did cheat to find that answer. Just to let you guys know. I didn't find that out on my own. It's true that Genshin Asoga's silence during his trial resulted in his conviction. But that didn't actually lead to his execution. On the contrary, it led to his escape. An escape that was only possible because he had been sentenced to death. Although I find it hard to believe my father would have negotiated in that way, the defense is correct. A fake execution, falsification of a death certificate, and a jailbreak inside a coffin. Clearly such an elaborate plan couldn't have been carried out by my father alone.
He must have had the help of a collaborator from the judiciary.
I have here the dismissal note of the chief warder who was working in the prison at the time. The notes read, there are indications that the jailbreak was in planning prior to the inmate's incarceration. In other words, there were suggestions of some sort of negotiation between Mr. Asogi and the British government. In exchange for his silence in court, he was given an assurance that he would be broken out of prison. Yes, with that sort of clandestine agreement in place, I can imagine he would have kept very quiet. I would go further than that, in fact. I would say that the elaborate jailbreak of Mr. Asogi can be explained in no other way.
Order! First fabricated evidence and now a jailbreak conspiracy?
Of course, because it's all intimately linked. The prosecution wishes to summon new witnesses to the stand.
Witnesses?
People who can testify about the jailbreak that took place 10 years ago. Governor Kaden and the poor chief warder of the prison?
I won't allow this trial to turn into a farce. To summon the governor of the prison after all these years?
Oh, it wouldn't be any trouble, my lord.
What? Father?
My dear friend may appear a little rattle-pated at times, but I can assure you he is extremely thorough. He wired both Barclay and the local prison earlier, asking Governor Caden and Mr. Vigil to attend the Old Bailey as a matter of extreme urgency.
Mr. Sholmes
Did that? Are you telling me that?
Both men are, unless I'm much mistaken, waiting just outside the courtroom at this very moment.
My lord, you must permit this trial to proceed as you declared at its outset. You promised that we would stop at nothing to uncover the whole truth behind these disturbing findings.
Very well. Bring in the witnesses. Make no mistake, I too would lack nothing more than to lay this business to rest once and for all.
Would the new witnesses state their names and occupations for the court, please?
I, Barry Caden, Governor of Barclay Prison.
Everyone calls me Gossip. Your other persona, if you don't mind.
Oh, I do beg your pardon, of course. My name is Daily Vigil. I used to be the chief warder at Barclay Prison.
The reason you have been summoned here to court today is to testify about the jailbreak of the so-called professor 10 years ago.
Look, the professor, we've already been through all this before, a decade ago. And the conclusion was that there was no anything untoward happened.
A convict escaped from your prison, Governor. Hardly what you'd call nothing untoward.
Well,
The convict's death certificate was somehow falsified after he was allegedly executed, and he escaped the prison inside his own coffin. A plan of that complexity could never have been carried out without the help of somebody of influence inside the prison. Governor Caden, don't imagine that the passage of time will afford you any protection. If it turns out that you were involved in the plot to break Mr. Asogi out of your prison, then of course the consequences will be very serious. In all likelihood, a capital punishment.
gods, hold on there, laddie. All I did was... With this, Governor Caden. Aye, sir. You have a critical role to play in the public safety of our country. A great responsibility to shoulder. The significance of your testimony in court cannot be understated. Therefore, think carefully before you speak. And Prosecutor Sergey, if you threaten the witness again, you will be held in contempt of court.
My apologies, my lord. There's no disputing the fact that an intricate jailbreak plot was enacted 10 years ago. Clearly, You are both involved in some way. So you will testify before the court now and explain exactly what took place.
Very well, let the witnesses give their formal testimony. Tell the court everything you know of the plot to break Asogi out of Barclay 10 years ago. It was the day that Japanese joke was found guilty. The directive came from the prosecutor's office. I signed the convict to the chief warder vigilante and put the plan into action behind the scenes. I was responsible for Asogi right up until the night of his execution, but I knew nothing of any plot. I didn't ken if there was some negotiations between the convict and the prosecutor's office. All I did was carry out my duty for Her Majesty's great British Empire.
Right. A directive from the prosecutor's office. Are you saying that was the jailbreak plot?
Aye, that's right.
Who sent it? Who authorized that plan?
I didn't ken that.
You're saying you don't know?
Listen, there was another thing about that professor case that was unusual in some way. I didn't ask any questions. I just did what I was told to do. More than that, I couldn't tell ya.
I see. But if the jailbreak plan originated from the prosecutor's office, then one thing is very clear. As suspected, there were clandestine dealings going on between Mr. Asogi and that office. The jailbreak was promised in exchange for Mr. Asogi admitting to crimes he didn't commit.
That, Counsel, is nothing more than speculation on your part. So, let me ask the defense.
Oh, yes, my lord?
I fail to see how these witnesses have any more pertinent information here. Do you intend to assert your right to a cross-examination?
Absolutely. I have no intention of squandering a single opportunity, my lord.
It seems all you Japanese are fearlessly tenacious. Very well. Proceed, Counsel.
Alright. Let's see where this leads us.
It was the day that Japanese joke was found guilty. A directive came from the prosecutor's office.
And you say you don't know who actually issued the directive?
Aye, that's right. All I can be sure of is that it was official.
But if it was from the prosecutor's office, that narrows it that narrows down who could have issued it straight away.
And it wasn't me. I can't even say with certainty that it did originate from the prosecutor's office.
What?
There's no telling where it started. There's a fair chance it came from Aeropalata. Basically, I can't give you any indication of who was behind it.
You can't be serious. All we can say for sure is that the order must have come from somebody in authority, I suppose.
Well, that's of us on the ground, as it were. Didn't bother with idle speculation. We just get the job done. I signed the convict to the chief warder vigilante and put the plan to action behind the scenes.
So, Mr. Vigil, you didn't know anything about it at all?
That's right. My only role in the scheme was as a scapegoat. That's right, isn't it, Governor? Some poor bagger had to take the rap for it.
Alright then, who else did know about the plan?
I've not the first idea, laddie. My part in the whole business was basically just dealing with the aftermath.
But I wouldn't be surprised if there were other folk in the prison service who've been given similar orders.
So you don't know who else was involved?
Aye, that's right. All I can tell ya is that the night it actually happened, the person at the reins was Dr. Stevens.
Dr. Courtney Stevens, or Dr. Scythe as she's known now.
Why did I have to get caught up in such a terrible business? I was responsible for Asogi right up until the night of his execution, but I knew nothing of any plot.
Hold it!
Did you not notice anything unusual happening in the lead up to that night?
Oh, everything was unusual, exception after exception. After all, it was the professor. The man had terrorized the country as never before with his crimes. In order to hide his identity, he was forced to wear an iron mask over his head.
Hideous treatment.
The fellow was surprisingly docile for someone who'd taken the lives of 5 of the country's nobles.
Being the chief warder, I was the only person permitted to approach his cell. I can still hardly believe that I was duped by my own country.
I believe you jumped from the window of the governor's office when the jailbreak was blamed on you, didn't you?
Loshwegel, I can't apologize enough.
No, Governor, I don't believe you can. It won't change what's happened.
And what else can you tell us about the situation, Governor Caden?
I didn't ken if there was some negotiations between the convict and the prosecutor's office.
Hold it!
But you've already acknowledged that orders came from the prosecutor's office to arrange for the man's escape. There must have been some sort of negotiation. It's the only explanation.
Aye, well, be that as it may, I didn't care nothing about that. The witness stand is no place for telling. The witness stand is no place for telling what you don't know for sure. I ken that much, I do.
Then I presume you also know this. Not telling what you do know is a criminal offense. So you were just following orders, is that it? I'm afraid that won't absolve you of guilt here. A man was still killed illegally, even if he was a condemned criminal. You may very well be found complicit in murder, Governor. So that's what it's to be, is it? Even with the threat of conviction, you won't break your silence.
All I did was carry out my duty for Her Majesty's great British Empire.
Hold it!
Did you carry out the plan in its entirety?
Aye, I did everything I could at the time.
As you know, Genshin Asugi was shot dead in Logate Cemetery after the escape. Tell me, was that part of the plan too?
My instructions were to do with getting the joke out of the jail and nothing more. I can't tell you anything about what happened after that. Only, personally, I believe his death was the last part of the plan.
Oh,
Excuse me.
Mr. Vigil, is something wrong?
Yes, sir. What can I do for you, sir?
He's saluting now? What is it? Some sort of Barclay convention? Oh, fuck off. What Governor Caden was just saying seemed to upset you. Did it bring something to mind, perhaps?
For the last 10 years, I've completely blotted out the memories of that time from my mind. I was betrayed by my superiors in the name of my country.
Just as my father was betrayed, it seems. But you see, thinking back now, I really can't imagine that the shooting of Mr. Asogi in the cemetery was ever part of the plan. What makes you think that? Well, it just doesn't make sense, does it? To make the man admit to crimes he didn't commit with the promise of jailbreak, only to kill him in the end. That's treachery of the worst kind. But the point is, if the intention was always to betray him, why would there be any need for all the chicaneries of an escape? Yes, that's quite true.
If whoever negotiated with Asogi never intended to keep his or her end of the bargain, it would have been far simpler just to let the man be executed in prison as dictated by his sentence.
It all happened in that vast chamber of secrets that is Barclay, behind the high prison walls. I suppose nobody knows what really went on in the execution room now. Yes, it's an unsettling mystery, certainly.
Truth be told, there is a wee matter that's never quite made sense to me. But if you believe there was some kind of negotiation behind the jailbreak between Asogi and a body at the top, it doesn't quite add up, does it?
Governor Caden, I must insist that you explain these doubts that you have by amending your formal testimony.
Gods! Aye, go on then. It seems to me that the Japanese fella didn't have nothing to bargain with.
Hold it!
Admitting to the crimes. That was what he had to bargain with, surely.
I cannot see that myself, and do call me surely. After all, did the prosecution not have conclusive evidence against the Kali, eh?
This, you mean, discovered during the final victim's autopsy? There's every possibility this conclusive evidence was fabricated by Scotland Yard and the prosecutor's office.
Objection!
Possibilities are all very well, but nothing has been proven. You can holler about misconduct in the trial 10 years ago all you like. But if you can't establish that it happened with hard evidence, no one's going to listen. Aye, that's right. So what I'm saying is, the convict had nothing he could use for any kind of bargaining at all. The witness makes an astute point. Logically, it would seem no negotiation could have taken place.
And yet the plan to break the man out of prison was definitely put into practice. So he must have been armed with something that gave him an angle to negotiate. So, Asogi-san agreed to confess to the crimes because he was assured he'd be broken out of the prison later. I really don't think that Kazuma-sama's father would have engaged in such negotiations. That perhaps something compelled him to agree. What a terrible thing, using the law to legitimize such underhand dealings with a desperate man, only to double-cross him in the end. It's quite the opposite of justice. I can't help feeling there's something about this apparent negotiation that doesn't quite add up. Something doesn't quite add up, Mr. Naruhodo. No, it doesn't. But I can't quite put my finger on what yet. Well, in that case, we must keep digging until we identify the problem. Yeah, I found the problem. There we go, and...
Objection!
Confessing under oath to murders he didn't commit on a verbal assurance of later being broken out of prison, Genshin Asogi was taking an incredibly risky gamble. Very true. There was nothing to stop the British breaking their word and executing him behind closed doors anyway. Under normal circumstances, no man would stake his life on a gentleman's agreement like that. Which means that Mr. Asogi must have had a trump card. Something that guaranteed he wouldn't be betrayed. Some kind of weapon.
Havers, a fella couldn't possibly have had anything like that.
But you know that he did, Governor. The Asogi Papers, the name given to the last will and testament of Genshin Asogi. It turns out that Mr. Asogi was hiding his last will in his cell at Barclay. Chief Warder Vigil caught him with it one day.
You squeal, did you wear out? Did I not tell you to keep that a secret? You can't touch me now.
When Mr. Vigil caught sight of that will through the bars of the convict cell, Mr. Asogi pleaded with the warder.
Alright then, but what's on that paper? A last will and testament. This will is the only weapon I have left now. A weapon?
And after the convict had been killed following the elaborate pretense of the jailbreak, that document mysteriously disappeared, didn't it?
Well, yes, all the prison warders searched for the belonging in his cell, but that will was just nowhere to be found.
As I understand it, an exhaustive search was made for the document, which became known as the Asogi Papers. Governor Caden, I believe you ordered your prison staff to find it at all costs, didn't you?
Eh?
Would I be right in saying that you knew? You knew that the so-called Asogi Papers had the potential to make great waves somehow?
Jengs, what the blazes are you blathering about? The will was found, right and proper, and the fella's cell where I said it would be.
But how can that be? Where in his cell? We all searched the place from top to bottom.
Well, you didn't do a proper job, eh, you will, you peely wally galloo.
You can't criticize me now.
I showed it to you before, didn't I know, young lawyer?
Yes, you did. I have the document here. It's written in Japanese and reads, "The last will and testament of Genshin Asogi."
Which means everything is as it should be.
Not quite, my lord. You see, there's an undeniable inconsistency here.
What?
What inconsistency? Mr. Asogi described this document as the only weapon he had left, and yet this will contains nothing of significance at all. Nothing that would have given the convict any leverage.
Are you suggesting, my learned friend, that the last will and testament stored at Barclay Prison all these years is actually a fake?
As has clearly been demonstrated already, what went on at Barclay Prison was far from above board.
That last vilification by the defense was an affront to the entire British legal system. This absurd notion of a weapon is something for which we have only the former Chief Warder's word. A man could quite easily be lying, or at the very least, sorely mistaken.
What? No, I definitely heard him say that, I swear. Clearly, we need to get to the bottom of this. We need to know exactly what happened with these so-called Asogi Papers.
A waste of time. If the will was fake, where is the real document?
Mr. Vigil was stabbed in the back by the judiciary 10 years ago. He lost everything, very nearly his own life. And now you're going to do it again. You're ready to brand him a liar and turn your back on him without even letting him defend himself? It's clear the Barclay prison is hiding something.
It's clear that the jailbreak was smashed by somebody in the prosecutor's office.
It's clear that some illegal negotiations took place. Is the Lord Chief just gonna gloss over those obvious?
What did you say?
We should hear more, Chief Warder!
Home testify again.
The trial must go on! The man's voice must be heard!
It would seem that a vocal few here are utterly blind to the truth. Very well then, let the witness testify again. Tell the court precisely what you think you saw of the convict's last will and testament. Yes, sir, my lord. As the warder responsible for condemned convicts, I attended to Mr. Asogi and kept watch over his cell. The night after he was found guilty in court, he was doing something with that will in his cell. We turned the cell inside out looking for it after the execution, but to no avail. I only found out about their soggy papers when a directive came telling me to impound them. The document was in the folds of the fellow's robe that was left in his cell. A kimono, I think it's called. A kimono. In his kimono? That's a lie. We searched every inch of the man's cell. We looked through all of his clothes. It can't be true. Were you not satisfied with calling me a liar once, eh? You wee waffenigger. There's nothing you can do about it now. You don't have any hold over me anymore. Other than the hold you like to take on my caravat, of course. Is that what you're going to do, is it? Are you going to give me a good shake again, or are you too scared?
Ah! Little and large. What a double act.
We complied with Asogi's will as far as was possible. We complied. All of his personal effects were delivered to his family home in Japan. As a courtesy to the homeland of the most notorious killer our country has ever seen.
And we were much obliged. I can confirm that all of my father's belongings arrived safely.
Aye, and you cannot deny the handwriting that is that of your old man, eh?
Yes, there's no mistaking that it's my father's brushwork. Really?
And this last will and testament was the man's last weapon, was it? I think we can safely assume that the convict was merely prattling, knowing that his end was nigh. So, counsel for the defense, your cross-examination, please.
Yes, my lord. Alright, here we go again.
As the warder responsible for condemned convicts, I attended to Mr. Asogi and kept watch over his cell.
So, would that mean that you converse with Mr. Asogi?
Yes, certainly, though there was precious little time before his execution was due. He was remarkably calm, considering his days were very much numbered. In all honesty, he really didn't strike one as a man capable of mass murder. Yet he confessed in full to the crimes. I know, that's why I felt compelled to ask him one day. I can still recall his reply. I am guilty of the unforgivable crime of ending another human's life. Yes. But he was so tranquil and intelligent, it put me in mind of an Eastern holy man.
And what about the will you saw him with? What can you tell us about that?
It was the beginning of all the drama. I remember it very well, yes. The night after he was found guilty in court, he was doing something with that will in his cell.
And he pleaded with you not to report him, didn't he?
Yes, that's right. And like the bumper you had, you didn't tell me. A blatant breach of trust that was. I could see that the man had a noble spirit. I found myself wanting to treat him accordingly. But according to what you told us 2 days ago, the convict had been strictly forbidden from having any writing materials whatsoever. Yes, you're quite right.
So when exactly was the will penned?
That was before the man was remanded in Berkeley, obviously. Yes, at the prosecutor's office under supervision of the relevant authorities. I personally instructed Asogi to make a will for the benefit of his family and his homeland.
In that case, why was it found in his cell?
What do you mean by that?
Well, if it was penned at the prosecutor's office, you would have expected that it would remain there for safekeeping, surely. It's curious. There doesn't seem to be any obvious explanation for why it was subsequently found in the convict's cell.
Well,
That events makes an astute point. Well, Governor?
Present Governor, can you be expected to ken the inner workings of the prosecutor's office?
In that case, Lord Strongheart, perhaps you can shed some light on the matter?
I am unable to offer an explanation here or now. I would have to consult with the notary responsible for the will at the time.
The fact that my father's will was discovered in his cell is clearly inconsistent with what was expected. I want to know why. Another inexplicable mystery, then.
Well, the thing is about that will. We turned the cell inside out looking for it after the execution, but to no avail.
It was the governor who ordered the search for the will, as I understand it. Is that right?
Yes, and when I reported back that we couldn't find it, he grabbed me by the cravat and yelled, "It can have disappeared completely," in my face. Aye, well, it's due to the governor to keep everybody working as hard as they should.
I think the governor needs a wee taste of his own medicine, Mr. Naruhodo. The point is, it was clearly considered a very important document, wasn't it? But it proved impossible to find.
That's right. Then before I knew it, it was in the morning paper, that blood-curdling article. The executed mass murderer who had risen from the dead.
Oh, you mean the article based on Mr. Jabber's experience in Lowgate Cemetery?
Yes, that was it. The day after I had read that news, I was summoned to the governor's office, and that's when the awful accusation was made.
That you'd aided Genshin Asogi to escape from the prison, resulting in your immediate dismissal.
I'm afraid I really don't remember anything after that. As the governor of the prison, I had no choice. I couldn't have done anything else. I only found out about the Asogi papers when a directive came telling me to impound them.
And that directive came from the same source as the one instructing you about the jailbreak?
Aye, from the top levels of the prosecutor's office.
What name was on it?
I didn't ken a for and I didn't ken there. All I can tell ya is that my orders were to do everything in my power to find that document. The directive said it had to be somewhere inside the fellow's cell.
Document. Was that the wording? Document, not will?
Aye, that's what it said.
Am I clutching at straws here? I just wonder if it was really Genshin Asogi's last will and testament that the sender of that directive was after. Continue with your testimony then, witness.
A document was on the folds of the fellow's robe that was left in his cell. A kimono, I think it's called.
Hold it!
In Mr. Asogi's kimono.
Aye, the one he had brought with him when he was locked up.
Yes, he was permitted to have his personal effects with him during his incarceration, I understand.
That's right. He was granted as much freedom as possible during the few days before his execution.
Indeed, he had a number of items of personal significance, I remember. He was very reluctant to part with them. Some books, that kimono, his sword. His sword? Karama, the famous sword of the Asogi clan. It bears the soul of my family. I don't doubt it, but I wasn't really getting at that. Forget it being the soul of the clan. Could the man have had a more obvious weapon? Have some respect, Renosuke. Respectful silence?
The warders carry firearms at all times, and the inmates have shackles around their ankles. He couldn't have hurt anybody with that thing.
Still, he was allowed a sword, but no writing materials.
Aye, he wrote that will before he came to stay with us at Berkeley, you see. Dr. McTurbo was asked to bring the necessary Japanese writing implements to the prosecutor's office.
A Sizuri ink stone, black sumi ink, and some hanshi rice paper, no doubt.
I was present when he wrote it, but I'm sorry to say the letters just look like a squirting massive jet black earthworms to me.
Excuse me.
Uh-oh. Are you feeling faint, Mr. Vigil? Mr. Vigil!
Sir, it was Scarlet, sir.
What?
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't mean to blurt it out like that.
Less swaying and more explaining would be helpful. Is it something about the testimony we just heard? Have you recalled something of importance?
Something of importance? Possibly, or possibly not.
I'm unable to tell which way he's leaning, I'm afraid. My lord, the defense asks that Mr. Vigil be permitted to supplement his testimony with this possibly or possibly not important detail.
Permission granted.
Go ahead, Mr. Vigil.
Yes, it was Scarlet. As I remember it, the document was written in scarlet ink, but perhaps I'm mistaken.
Hold it!
Scarlet, you say?
Well, yes, I mean, I only caught sight of it for a brief moment, of course. But even by the dim light in the cell, I remember thinking that it was an unusual color. At the very least, I am quite sure it wasn't black. Witness! Is that really what you saw? Sir!
Is something wrong, Lord Strongheart?
I apologize. Continue.
What do you make of that, Mr. Naruhodo? For Lord Strongheart to be so visibly shaken in that way.
Ugh, Danny Halver, you can plainly see the writing here, and it's as black as the Earl of L's waistcoat.
Well, yes, you're right. Mr. Vigil, I'd like to confirm one point with you. Did you actually see the content of the document that Mr. Asogi was holding that night?
Oh, well, no. I mean, there was no time. As soon as he noticed me there, he hid behind his back.
But it was definitely a will, was it?
Yeah, it was. That's what Mr. Asogi told me. The court need waste no further time on this matter. We have the will in question in our possession,
There is nothing more to add. A will written in scarlet ink. What did Mr. Vigil really see Kazuma's father holding, I wonder? If you have an inkling, Mr. Naruhodo, you must present it to the court at once. That testimony doesn't give much away. So, this will was really penned by Kazuma-sama's father. I wonder what he could possibly have meant when he described it as a weapon. It's starting to sound very much like Mr. Asogi actually had nothing. But the plan to break him out of jail went ahead, which means he must have had some bargaining power. He must have been hiding something. It's the only explanation that makes sense. It's starting to sound like Mr. Asogi actually might have had something. Which is it, Mr. Naruhodo? I'm not sure, but I feel as though I'm on the brink of understanding all of this. Let's listen to all the information again and see what more we can learn. We can't overlook even the smallest detail. Absolutely. Alright, here we go. Scarlet ink. Scarlet ink. Nope. Nope. Nope.
What? What?
Let me read it. Let me read it. Let me read it. How did I miss this? Let me read this again. Recent scarlet ink stains visible on the little and ring fingers of the right hand, but no document and corresponding ink was found. What the? On Clint's body. What? What does this mean, though? I don't know. Let's present it. Scarlet-colored writing is what you said you thought you saw, Mr. Vigil. And I believe that's exactly what you did see.
What? However, again, you've no evidence to say that.
Have a look at this report.
That's my brother's autopsy report.
Yes, and there's something in here that's bothered me since I first read it. It states that scarlet-colored ink stains were noted on the fingers of the victim's right hand. Yes, so it does.
Scarlet ink?
Now, I'm not familiar with the habits of the British aristocracy, I freely admit, but I would hazard a guess that they don't all go around with ink stains on their fingertips, do they?
Your wit is not appreciated. My brother was a well-bred and fastidious man. Should ink have sullied his fingertips, he would have cleaned them immediately. What is your point, Counsel?
My point is this. Whatever Lord Clint Van Zeeks was writing in that unusually colored ink, it must have been directly before his death. Because he died before he had the opportunity to clean his hand.
What? I remember something troubled me at the time. At the scene, the lid of my brother's inkwell was open. But Clint was punctilious about such things. It seemed unusual. And no document penned in the color of the ink that was in the inkwell was ever found.
So the document had disappeared. Are you suggesting that the document my father had in his hand that night in his cell was the same document that Lord Clint Van Zeeks was writing moments before his death?
Then, it was...
If Mr. Vigil's testimony is to be believed, it could only mean that, yes. Mr. Vigil?
Sir?
When you spotted Mr. Asogi with the document in his cell, his precise words were as follows, were they not?
Alright then, but what's on that paper? Arrest, will, and testament. This will is the only weapon I have left now.
A last will and testament? If the conversation really did go as Mr. Vigil says, then what we now know completely changes the meaning of what Mr. Asogi said.
You really think?
Mr. Vigil did indeed see the convict with a will, but it wasn't that of Genshin Asogi. It was the last will and testament of Lord Clint Van Zeeks. No! What?
Objection!
This is madness. My brother's last will and testament. That would mean that he had chosen to die.
That is what it would mean, yes.
No, impossible. That is utterly out of the question.
Lord Van Zeeks.
Clint was pursuing the professor. It consumed him day and night. Whatever happened, he would never have abandoned his investigation before its conclusion. Never! He wouldn't rest until the job was done, until the killer was caught. The idea that he would willingly accept his own death is obscene.
Objection!
And yet, we can be sure that he was writing his will moments before his death, and that Genshin Asogi came to be in possession of that document. So what could the will possibly have contained? Clearly something that couldn't be made public under any circumstances whatsoever, because armed with that document, my father was able to negotiate with the judiciary for his life. It was something so damning that it prompted the powers that be to enact this daring jailbreak plot. Yes, there can be no question that the will contained information of the utmost secrecy. Information of the utmost secrecy? Ah! No, it couldn't be.
I've heard more than enough. Pursuing this notion of a phantom will nobody can attest to having seen serves absolutely no purpose.
No, my lord, that's unacceptable.
What did you say, Counsel?
The last will and testament that Genshin Asogi had in his possession was that of Lord Clint Van Zeeks. All the testimony and evidence presented to the court has logically led us to that as a possibility. We have a duty to pursue the line of reasoning to its conclusion.
But with no possible means of knowing the contents of the document, there is no line of reasoning to pursue.
A reason why Lord Clint Van Zeeks, a man of high and noble standing, would have chosen death. Information so secret, people in the judiciary would be willing to negotiate the jailbreak of a condemned killer. The only explanation that fits those facts is Lord Strongheart's nudes. Is an unthinkable truth that turns absolutely everything on its head. But it's just too hideous, Mr. Naruhodo. However difficult the situation might become, you work with your client in pursuit of the truth. That's what you resolved to do when you entered the courtroom this morning, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Sato. So hold your head high and keep soldiering on. Yes, you're right. 10 years ago, in his final moments, Lord Clint Van Zeeks left behind a will. A will that Genshin Asogi was able to use as a weapon to negotiate his escape from prison. In all probability, the details in the will were related to the Professor case.
The defense's last statement is mere conjecture. What are you getting at, man?
Rinosuke! As soon as these words come out of my mouth, there's no going back. I believe that the last will and testament of Lord Clint Van Zeeks was in fact... You can do this, Mr. Naruhodo. I believe that what Lord Clint Van Zeeks actually penned that day was a confession. A confession. regarding the mass murderer known as the Professor and his true identity.
Objection!
Enough! Counsel! What are you saying? Do you even realize? A confession about the true identity of the Professor? That would mean...
Lord Van Zieks, I appreciate this must be hard to take in, but it's the only explanation that fits. The killer that terrorized London a decade ago and became known as the Professor, the man believed to have murdered 5 members of the aristocracy, wasn't Genshin Asogi at all. No, you can't be suggesting. It was in fact the man believed to have been the 5th victim. Lord Clint Van Zieks himself.
It's finally open, is it? Pandora's box. The great Van Zieks family. They've been the thoroughbred for the judiciary for years.
Lord Clint Van Zieks, the paragon of justice,
He was actually mass murderer, a perpetrator of the atrocities. If the general public ever found out, law and order in the country will be...
My brother.
Oh, this is too awful. Poor Lord Van Zieks. I wonder though, did he never suspect? Mr. Naruhodo? Lord Barak Van Zieks is a brilliant prosecutor. Is it conceivable that he didn't realize what his older brother really was?
Order in the court.
Lord Van Zieks. I hate to interrupt the flow, but I chose that option as a joke. I didn't know that was the actual true course of this story. But anyway. The professor made use of an enormous hound as his murder weapon. Tell me, did your brother own a dog?
Yes, he did. Balmung. He was a well-known hunting dog. People called him a giant.
I don't believe this.
When my brother would go hunting in the forest of the grounds behind the house, he always took Balmung. After Clint's death, the creature passed away too, almost as if he were following his master. He was a magnificent hunting dog, worthy of the jewel-studded collar around his neck.
A jewel-studded collar?
That's right. So sadly, some years ago now, it was stolen by a thief who broke into the house one night.
A jewel-studded collar stolen by a thief. It so happens that myself and my colleagues have come across such a collar during our time in London.
How could you?
There was an old emblem attached to the collar too, made of pure gold. It was topped with a small crown and bore an ornate capital letter B.
What? An emblem bears the initial B?
Oh my, you know it.
It's the insignia of the Baskerville family.
What? The Baskerville? Why is that name coming up now?
Baskerville is the family name of my late brother's widow. That pure gold emblem was an heirloom which Clint acquired upon their marriage. There can be no doubt then. The collar you've described was Balmung's.
The family insignia of Lord Clint Van Zieks' widow. There was a considerable amount of blood on the collar when we saw it. Since we know the dog was used for hunting, it could have been from its quarry, of course. But it could equally have been from human prey.
So it is so then?
Clint Van Zieks really was the professor?
Impossible! Those Japanese are making this up! So in fact, the person responsible for these murders of nobles and royals was a noble himself. And that threatened to be an enormous scandal that would irrevocably destabilize British society. My father knew that, and was using it to negotiate his way out of the unjust charges brought against him. But at the very last hour, those he'd bargained with betrayed him, slaying him mercilessly on foreign soil. Well, can you deny it, Lord Strongheart?
"10 years have passed, and still now the 6 million inhabitants of our great capital rest easy, believing that justice was done. That though his anonymity remains, the diabolical murderer was caught and executed. Very well then, you may have the truth.
Tell me, son. Tell me what Clint really was.
Lord Clint Van Zeeks was too pure of heart. When he became a prosecutor and went in pursuit of the black roots of crime, he drove himself into a corner. He came to the uncomfortable realization that to fight the most fiendish of criminals requires one to become even more fiendish oneself.
Clint.